All right, everybody, we are ready to go. So this session is new VFPX projects. Normally I skip by the about me part of the presentation. I usually say something flippant like, I've been doing this for a long time, and kind of go on. But in 30 years of speaking, my wife has never actually heard me present before, and she's actually at the back of the room. So I thought she might want to know something about me. So I've written a couple of software packages you may have heard of: Stonefield Query, Stonefield Database Toolkit, the latter of which is now open source. I've written a number of tools that come with Visual Fox Pro in the box, including the member data editor and so on, and some Sedna, upsizing wizard, and my. I've written a lot of articles over the years in Fox Talk, Advisor, and Fox Rock X. Co-author of several books, including The Hacker's Guide, which is, again, now open source. As you know, I'm one of the organizers of Southwest Fox and Visual Fox Fest. I'm a co-administrator of VFPX. I was a Microsoft MVP for 15 years. And in 2006, I was given the Fox Pro Lifetime Achievement Award. So what this session is going to be a very quick slide. 3 new VFPX projects new this year: the VFPX Framework, FoxGet, and DeployFox. Now, Rick is also doing a session on VFPX project as well. I'm focusing on these 3 particular ones because I wrote them and I wanted to kind of show folks and get people to start using them. So, all right, let's start with VFPX Framework. Every VFPX project has its own set of UI classes. So, for example, Project Explorer has subclasses of the VFP-based classes, like checkbox and text box. Thor has a subclass of all the VFP-based classes. So there's duplication there. Somebody had to create these base classes, and then the next time a new project was started, somebody created a new set of base classes, and so on. And many projects have common functionality. For example, Thor and FoxGet both need to download and unzip files. And again, that code was sort of written from scratch each time. So the idea of VFPX Framework is to have a common set of shared classes, both visual, but also libraries for functionality for VFPX projects. So the idea is to eliminate duplicated effort in all these different projects. But you may not necessarily be creating a VFPX project yourself. These tools can be used in any application. So if you, I'm certain you already have a subclass, a base class library that you use, but maybe you don't have a downloading library or unzipping library or things like that. So if you find things that are useful in here, feel free to use them wherever you want to. So there's a class library. Actually, I'll show you that real quick here. Oops. There is a VFPX base library.vcx that has subclasses of not all, but most of the VFP base classes. There's documentation on what's different about these. For example, all the labels have backstyle set to transparent and common changes like that. But there's also some commonly used functions. For example, reading from or writing to INI files, the Windows Registry, persisting form size and position. So if you open a form, you resize, you move it up in the corner, you close it. The next time you open it, it'll open up at the exact same size and position. File operations like copying files and deleting folders, but first of all, supporting recursive operations. So if you delete a folder that has 10 different subdirectories and each of those are full of files, one command to delete all of that. And having a dialog that pops up if there's, if you're copying a large number of files, the typical Windows copy file dialog will pop up showing you the progress. So that's all sort of included with that. Uploading and downloading files, zipping and unzipping files, and so on. There are 2 ways you can get this. One is you can go to the GitHub repository for it. And let me just move this page over here so you can see it. So here is the GitHub repository. It's VFPX Framework. And like I said, it has try not to get that to resize. There we go. It has full documentation on everything. Sorry, I got to resize this a little bit smaller. I hate, this is the one feature of Windows I hate, is that Windows snap thing where it just automatically, I size the window and then I move it and it says, no, I'm going to resize it for you. Okay, so it has complete documentation on all of the classes. So differences for what's involved in all of the, click on that link again, information about all of the base classes, information about all the different utilities. It's all here in the repository. Now, the other way you can get it, let me just close this, is with FoxGet, which I will talk about next after talking about the framework. I've already installed that in my sample application here. So if we take a look, this is the folder that we'll be looking at the sample application. But you'll notice there's a packages folder in here, and here is VFPX Framework. So here are the files that make up the framework. There's not a lot of them. There's a few VCXs, a few PRGs, and so on. We don't have to worry about the detail there. But this is what it's going to typically look like. Now, in addition to those base classes, there are also a number of what I call specialty components. We'll talk about each of these: a grid builder, a persistence object, a drop-down menu button, and so on. So let's go and take a look at this form here. We'll start with this, and let's start with a grid. So I'm just going to go and drop one of the VFPX classes, the VFPX base grid. We'll put that here and just resize it a bit. I'm using Visual Fox Pro Advanced, which has a little bit of an issue when you're working at higher, even though I'm working at 175% scaling here. I have a high resolution display, and it kind of gives these odd, you can see there's kind of an odd shape there being as I drag it. That's just a VFPA artifact. Anyway, this actually works with any grid, not just this grid, but I'm using this grid to make it a little bit easier. So I'm just going to take this text here. We'll copy it, and then right click on the grid, then choose builder, and boom, we just built a grid for us. I did this because I've worked on projects before where, you know, you already have this grid and now you need a new column in column 5, right? But I already have a column 5, 6, 7, and 8. I need to insert a new column. Well, yeah, you can go and change the column position and renumber your columns. And the more you do that, the more it gets out and out, more and more out of sync. I'm looking at column 4, but it's actually position 8, you know, and that gets confusing. So with this, you just create a bunch of text and you copy it and you invoke the builder, and it takes care of building the grid for you. So the first column is field. So inv_num, date, name. The next column is width. So 70 pixels. A star means auto size this column to the remaining width after all the other columns are sized. So in this case, you know, I'm using 70, 70, 60, 30, and so on. This will be whatever space is left for that grid. The caption, the alignment, R, L, or C, right, left, or center. An input mask, format, read only, and a control. So you can specify, for example, a checkbox. So that's why we get a checkbox in this column here. So if I run this form, there's my grid. Okay, and it was that simple. I'm not going to, but if I wanted to add a new column in position 5, I just go and add a new row right here, fill in all the settings, and it's just tab delimited and vertical bars to separate the columns. I would just add a new row in here, rerun the builder, boom, now I've got the grid has been now adjusted to fit that. All right, the next thing is, let's go and run this form again, and you'll see that there's sometimes it's called a split button. It's a menu button with a drop down. So the idea is I want to click this button maybe to open a project, or I want to click on the down arrow to open an MRU list of projects. Now, these aren't going to do anything. If I choose customers, it just displays a message box. So it's not really doing any behavior. But let's go and take a look at how that was implemented. So here's the button, and it has a shortcut menu method. Now, this is using another VFPX project, the object-oriented menu. So really, I'm just going to call methods, add bar. So we're going to add a customer's bar, and all it's going to do is it's just going to display a message box. In a real application, you'd call a method of the form or some PRG or whatever. Same thing with projects and invoices. There are a couple of functions that I'll show you in a few minutes that are going to do something. In this case, download zip file will actually call a method of the form, download. Unzip will call unzip, and delete folder will call delete folder. So that's pretty much all there is to implement the drop-down part of the menu button. You just fill in this method with the bars that you want and what actions to take, and you're done. Now, there's also what happens when you click the big button, the open folder button. Well, in that case, it's going to execute whatever's in the button clicked method. And in this case, we're going to, actually, let me show you first, and then we'll take a look at the code. So let's run that. So when I clicked on the drop down, I got my menu. And like I said, frequently used for MRU kind of things, but not necessarily. When I click on the main part of the button, it's going to open up a file dialog. And a couple things to note about this. First of all, this is not get file, put file. This is a modern Windows file dialog. So it supports all the typical things that you get with Windows. It allows you to specify a starting folder and a starting file name. And it allows multiple selection if you want. It's something you specify as an option, but I can choose multiple files, which we can't do with get file. And when I choose open, it shows up, just displays a list of the files that you chose. And it returns the file names in the proper case, not all uppercase like get file and put file do. So the way that was implemented, very simply, there's a wrapper program. There's a class here. Scroll down a bit here. VFPX common dialog, which is a modification of the underscore common dialog that comes with the FFC classes. But this cleans it up a bit and adds a few more capabilities. And I have a wrapper program for it, get file name. So you just pass it the same kind of things you would open file, get file. So what file skeleton you want, what initial starting file name you want filled in, what the caption should be, whether it accepts this parameter here means I want to do multi-selection, and so on. And then we just display a message box of the files. All right, let's run this form again. And I'm just going to resize it a little bit here and move it up over here and then close it and run it again. And the form opens in the same size and position it was before. So that is because it has this persistence object. This is the VFPX persistent form library, and it has a VFPX persist object. So I just dropped it on the form and didn't do anything with it. I also set, this is a subclass of the VFPX persistent form class, although you could use any base class, doesn't have to be that. But the form itself has choose the form here. The form itself, and I think this window is going to be a little bit too big to see. There we go. It has a C registry key property. Let's resize this. Can I get it small enough so I can actually see what I'm showing? There we go. Okay, so it has a C registry key property. All you do is you set that property to the registry location, the Windows registry. It's going to be HKey current user something. In this case, software / samples. So that's where it's going to write the form size and position to. And so when the next time you run the form, it restores that size and position and puts the form back where it was before. Let's run this form again. And let's choose download zip file. Okay, the download is done. And if we take a look in the folder here, I didn't show you this before, but there was no folder called download. There is now. It created a folder and it downloaded VFPX framework.zip from the repository for it into that folder. We'll then choose the next item in the menu, unzip file, and it's done. And if we go back in this folder, now we see that there's a source folder that wasn't there a minute ago, and the contents of that zip file were unzipped into this folder. And finally, we'll choose delete folder, and that folder and all the subdirectories are now gone with no error message because the folder wasn't empty, and it would have done it recursively, because remember we had that source subdirectory of the download folder that it just took care of it automatically. All right, so that was kind of our whirlwind tour through VFPX framework. Any questions? Yes, Shannon.
Is there an equivalent get folder function?
There is. It's really just using the, well, I'm not going to show it to you, but it's really just using the Windows API, the browse for folder API function. So yes, Kevin. Great question. The answer is yes, because that always annoys me. Oh, sorry. Does the persist class know about multi-monitors, so that if it was originally on monitor 2 and monitor 2 is now disconnected, what will happen to it? It will move it'll move itself onto the prime monitor 1 automatically. Yep. Any other questions? Yes. Does it support paths longer than 250 characters? It supports whatever Windows supports. So it's an operating system limitation. No? All right. FoxGet. So how many people here use Thor? Just about everybody. Virtual people, how about you? Oh, I can't see your hands anyway. So Thor has a really great functionality, check for updates. So the idea is that you can you can install something very easily. You can keep it updated. It'll tell you when there's a new version and so on. The only downside, in my opinion, of Thor CFU is that it works great for tools, but less well for components. What's the difference? Well, a tool is something that runs in your IDE, like Go Fish or like Thor itself. Whereas a component is something that you're going to add to your application, such as maybe VFPX Framework or some of the things that Rick is going to show in his session. Things that don't work in the IDE, they're something that you're going to include in your project file. The reason why I say it works less well for components is because Thor CFU always installs in a subdirectory of Thor itself. And that's not necessarily where you would want that file to go. You'd probably want to put it, under your project folder or in some common location, but not under Thor, probably. And the other thing is that if you decide that, hey, I've got a really cool thing there, I'd like to add it to Thor, it requires updating the repository, which means you have to, contact Jim and send him an installer file. He has to add it to the repository. It's a bunch of work to add it, and a zip file has to be updated and so on. So it's a bunch of work. So anybody here use .NET? So few, okay. So if you do, then you're probably familiar with NuGet. NuGet is the .NET package manager, and it's a really great way the best way of adding libraries to your .NET applications. It gives you a search facility, so you can search for, if you're looking for JSON, for example, you type JSON in the search window, and it gives you a list of all the libraries that are available that provide JSON functionality. It gives you the ability to install them, update them, remove them, and so on. So FoxGet is essentially the VFP equivalent of NuGet. That was my intention, was to create something that would mimic NuGet for Fox for developers. You can either get it directly from the repository or through the Thor CFU. So here's a snapshot of Thor check for updates. You can see that FoxGet is one of the tools that's listed there. And again, same thing with the, let me move this over here. Same thing with the repository for VFPX Framework. It has full documentation. Window snapping. Where'd that go? Oh, well, you get the idea. All right, so using FoxGet, there's a couple ways you can launch it. One is you can just do foxget.app, or if you did install it using Thor, you choose Thor Tools, Applications, FoxGet. I'll show you the UI in just a moment, but it's going to look like the screenshot over at the right here. You can select a particular package, and I say package. I use that term because that's what the term NuGet uses. Think of it as a library. Okay, so you choose the package, and over at the right, it'll show you information about that package. You can search for packages by name or by tag. So tag would be some keywords, or by the description, any keywords in there at all. And you can have it optionally display only installed packages. So if you want to just see the ones you have installed, then you can do that. So let's go back to, I'm actually going to close that window. And let's go back to VFP and close that guy and that. And let's go Thor Tools, Applications, FoxGet. Okay, so here's the FoxGet UI. when you choose a particular library, you see information about it over at the right. So a description, which is basically pulled right from its repository, some tags, the author, when it was published, what the latest version number is, if it has any dependencies on other projects, URL. So if you click this, this will take you to the home page for that project, whether it was installed or not, and when and what version, and so on. So if we take a look, for example, at log for VFP, this is another VFPX project. Here's the URL. You'll notice it has a dependency on www.net bridge. So it tells you that. Under notes, it's telling you, in addition, obviously, to adding something to your project, you're going to have to deploy these DLLs as well, just sort of as a little reminder in case you didn't catch that in the documentation. This has not been installed yet, but VFPX Framework was. So you can see that it has buttons down here because it knows it's installed. There's a reinstall button, which would basically just re-download it. There's an uninstall button, and there's an update button because there is actually a newer version. You can see that the version I installed is from July 14th, but there is a newer version. I haven't updated it yet, but I could click update and it would go and do the update process. You can do a search. For example, I'm looking for something for crosstabs. So is there something like that? Well, there is. There's FastXTab. So it's a library that's available that would give you crosstab capabilities in your application. All right, so how you will install a particular package or a library is, or what happens when you do that, is it downloads the package from wherever it's defined that it's located at. It downloads it to a subdirectory of a packages folder under your application directory. If that folder doesn't exist, it'll create it. It may add files to your project, and we'll take a look. We'll see how that works. The folder where it installs in will have at least one PRG, which is basically the uninstaller, plus any other files that make up the library. And it's also going to add it to a record in a table called packages.dbf in the packages folder. That way it knows what's installed, what version it is, and so on. So if we take a look at this folder on my machine, we can see that I have two packages installed. Here's that packages.dbf, and there are two packages installed, the OOP menu, which is what gives us that drop-down for the drop-down button, and VFPX Framework, which gave us the grid builder and the other things I was showing you. So let's go to VFP here, and let's go and install another package. So let's go to Format, and let's install that. And you can see it's got a little status thing there. It went by pretty quick because it's a small library. It was installed. And if we take a look at the project now, oops, move this out of the way, you can see that format.prg was added to the project. And if we look at the packages folder, there's a new format subdirectory that contains two files, format.prg and the uninstaller for that. And I won't show you, but there was a record added to packages.dbf as well. If we go back to VFP, let's go and grab another one. Let's go and grab log for VFP, and let's install that. And it's doing its thing, showing the status as it goes along. But because log for VFP has a dependency on www.net bridge, and www.net bridge was not already installed, it installs that, and it tells us that it was successful, and it installs log for VFP. So what we'll see in the packages folder here is now not only the log for VFP folder, but also the www.net bridge folder because of that dependency. And if we take a look at our project, we can see that log for VFP.prg was added, as was www.net bridge. And in fact, if I go to, you can see that I can uninstall log for VFP, but I can't uninstall www.net bridge because it's a dependency of log for VFP. If I uninstall log for VFP, now I can uninstall www.net bridge, but I can't uninstall it as long as there's a dependency living for that. So you may be asking yourself, why does FoxGet use a packages folder under the project rather than some common location. Because if I'm going to be using the format library in lots of different places, I'm going to have a packages subdirectory with a format subdirectory under every one of my application folders. Well, there's the main reason is because that's how NuGet works, and I decided I was emulating NuGet, so that's the main reason. But there are actually better reasons as well. It's better for source control. Because if my project is under source control, but it references libraries that are not under that folder structure, how do I get those into the repository? I have to have a common parent for both of those folders as the repository location. And that gets really messy. Plus, there might be versioning issues. For example, maybe your application is using www.NET Bridge 5.2 or whatever, and there's a new version that comes out and it has some breaking changes. Now, if it was a common location that got changed, now I'd have to go to all of my applications that use www.NET Bridge and do whatever was necessary to fix that breaking change. Well, you know what? It's working fine. Version 5.1 was working fine for me in this application. I don't actually need the new version for this application. Why should I go through all that pain? So by keeping the versions separate, because it has its own subdirectory, you avoid any versioning issues as well. Now, one thing you will have to do, because they're under all these libraries are added to the packages, a subdirectory of the packages subdirectory of your project folder. If you want to run your application in the IDE, you'd have to just set a path. So that's one of the things I've done here. If we take a look at this, we can actually close this now. If we take a look at that form I was running earlier, in the load method, it sets a path to the packages VFPX framework and packages OOP menu, so that way I can run it and it can find all the files that it needs to access.
Should that be additive?
This is a demo form. And if it was additive, as we learned in Tori's session yesterday, got to put quotes around it, right? All right, so what about creating your own packages? So as I mentioned, the documentation in the repository has complete information about how to create your own installer, but I will show you in a moment just kind of a couple of quick installers. So after you've created an installer, you can either submit it to me and I'll add it to the repository, or you can fork the repository and add it to the installers folder and update this one DBF and then submit a pull request. And either way, this package will now be available to everybody. And I've had a number of people actually do that. The latest one is there's a new VFPX project called PDFium, which is a PDF library for VFP applications. And the guy who created that library also created a FoxGet installer for it and did a fork of the repository, added it, and now it's just another project with no involvement for me whatsoever. Now, you might want to test your installer. And how would you do that? Well, I took this from Thor, this idea from Thor, and that is a My Packages folder. If we take a look at where FoxGet is installed, because I installed it using Thor, check for updates, it's installed under Thor, Tools, Apps, FoxGet, and you notice there's a My Packages DBF here. So if you add a definition to your installer, to My Packages, it's not deployed to anybody else in the world, it's only for you. So when you run the FoxGet UI, you'll see it listed as a package. You can click on it, you can install it, it'll do whatever it needs to do. If it's got a bug, you can fix it and try again, and so on. Or you might use My Packages for things that you don't want deployed to the rest of the world. This is something, it's an internal tool that we use. It's a library that we put in all of our projects, but I don't want it available to anybody else. So I'm going to just put it into the My Packages DBF, and now my team can very easily install it in any new application using FoxGet, and it's only available from our server, for example. So let's go and take a look at a couple of installers. This is probably the simplest installer you can build, the one for the format library. So the code that's above, this code up here isn't actually executed. It's really there for testing purposes. I could run this PRG and it would do the installer. What FoxGet actually does is it does this part here. So it instantiates a class with the same name as the PRG, and that's a subget of the FoxGet class. So we specify a base URL here. So here's where we're going to download the library from. You might think, well, if it's coming from GitHub, shouldn't it be github.com/whatever? Yes, but for downloads directly, it's actually raw.github, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, this is coming from the Doug Hennig formatting strings, and you also have to specify the branch that you're going to be downloading from as well. Now, URLs are case sensitive because GitHub is probably running on a Linux server, so you do have to watch that, and we'll see an example of that in a moment. Anyway, so this FoxGet class knows all about downloading files and unzipping files and copying files from here to here. So all we really have to do is tell it what to download. In this case, it's only a single file. So this.add file, we want format.prg from this location. We want it added to the project. And this is actually not required anymore. It's what path was it going to be downloaded to, but it uses this by default, so we wouldn't really have to specify it. Let's look at a little bit more complicated one, ParallelFox installer. So this is used to install ParallelFox. So it comes from this URL, and here are the files we're going to download. And here's where I mentioned case sensitivity. So ParallelFox with uppercase VCT, but a lowercase VCX, because that's the case that those files are in the GitHub repository. So we're going to download parallelfox.vcx, not add it to the project though, but we are going to download the VCT. We are going to download the VCX, and we are going to add that to our project. And then we're going to download a bunch of other files. None of the other ones are going to go into the project. Now, this does require a custom installation though. That's the list of files to download, but we also do have to do some additional tasks. So what we're going to do is we're going to, after all the sort of normal things, and actually Joel actually wrote this code. So we're going to create, create a directory. We're going to copy files from the temporary folder that they were downloaded to into the package path. And then we're going to do the ParallelFox install.prg. This makes sure that the COM object is registered on the user's machine. And then we'll just get rid of a bunch of temporary files that we don't need anymore. They were needed for installation purposes only. We don't need them anymore. So let's go and delete them. And the same thing with uninstall. So when the package is uninstalled, we have a couple of one custom task to do, and that's to run the uninstall program. So that way the COM object gets unregistered. Okay, so if you're interested in writing your own installers, check the documentation. They're pretty easy to do, but it's, like I said, it's all documented there. Any questions about FoxGet? Yes, Joel.
Do you have any recommendations for source control?
Good question. Are there any recommendations for source control of the packages folder? Yes, include them. Yeah, you probably want packages.dbf, because if well, I shouldn't say that. You may or may not need it, but I probably would put all that in source control in the same way that you'd have to decide, I guess, if you have a Visual Studio project, do you include the packages in your repository or not? It's sort of a decision that you would make, but it kind of makes sense. Because otherwise, if you don't, then when somebody clones that repository, now they have to go and, those files may or may not be there. They'd have to go and use FoxGet to reinstall them. But even if they are there, if you didn't include the packages.dbf in the repository, then FoxGet doesn't know anything about those packages. The code would be there, but it would think that they weren't installed. So you'd have to, the install button would be enabled for all of them, even though they were installed. Any other questions? Nope. All right. Let's go on to DeployFox. Rick Borup a few years ago, I think maybe 10 years ago, so did a session here, at a Southwest Fox on Final Builder. And I think about 5 years ago or so, Tracy Pearson did a session on automating the application deployment. I kind of like to do little projects, when on weekends and evenings and time free. I like to work on little fun projects, and I decided this was going to be a little fun project, but it's actually really useful for me because it automates application deployment. Deploying an application typically consists of a bunch of tasks, and let me show you what the task list used to be to deploy Stonefield query. So here is, there we go. Here was my old checklist. I just had an Excel spreadsheet. I actually had it as a template. So that way, every time I did a new deployment, I would just double click and I'd get a new document. That way I wouldn't be changing the template. But these are all the tasks. Oops, let me make this a little bigger. Here are all the tasks necessary to deploy Stonefield query. They're all manual tasks, right? Copy this file, change the version number here, update this file, change the copyright, copy files from here to here, build an exe, run Inno Setup, upload the file, just a ton of manual tasks. And to make matters worse, this is the Stonefield Query SDK. We also have custom versions of Stonefield Query, 6 of them. Each of them has a set of tasks, not all of which are done for all of them. That's why there's X's in some of the squares. But every one of these tasks, all, 120 of them, had to be done manually. So not only is it time consuming, it's also error prone, right? Oops, I made a mistake. I forgot to do one task, even though it was on the list, I didn't do it, but I got distracted and I missed doing that. You know what I mean? It can be a very time challenging kind of thing. So I created DeployFox as a way of automating project deployment. So a set of tasks I call a project. So we'll have a project file that defines all the tasks that make up a deployment. Those tasks are stored in a table. You put that table wherever you want to. You give it the name. So when you create a new project, you'll see this in a moment. But when you create the project, when you create a new DeployFox project, you specify the location and the name of the table. Okay. Now, so what DeployFox supports is, and a lot more than just this, but it supports tasks like copying files, renaming files, deleting files, building a VFP project into an app or an exe, digitally signing an executable, running Inno Setup, uploading files, downloading files, zipping files, you name it, kind of all the typical things that you would need. I've done tasks for each of the things I've needed to do. You may have other things, and so we can easily add more tasks to it, because tasks are all just stored in a task table. They're all subclasses of a task.prg that do an action of some kind. And so you just have to write the action, and now you've got a brand new task available in the task list. And again, you can download it from the repository or Thor check for updates. So again, you can see here by the screenshot that DeployFox, it will appear in Thor check for updates. You just turn it on, click install. Now you've got it. So there's 2 ways you can run it. You can either do deployfox.app, or if you use Thor check for updates, Thor tools, applications, DeployFox. We'll take a look at the UI. You can see there's a toolbar across the top. There's a list of tasks, properties for each task, and a status bar at the bottom. So let's actually go and fire that up. So Thor tools, applications, DeployFox, okay? And let's open up a project. So you'll recognize this button, it's coming, and it's a split button. So if I were to click on this, that would allow me to bring up a file dialog where I can choose the project to open, but I have an MRU list here of projects I've previously opened. So we'll open up this test project. So across the top, we've got buttons to create a new project. And when I click on this, it would open up a dialog allowing me to choose a location and a name for the project DBF. I can clone an existing project, because you may have, for example, my Stonefield query for AccountMate is very similar to the Stonefield query SDK, not quite as many tasks, and in some cases some different tasks, but a lot of the tasks are the same. So I'll clone the project and then make whatever changes are necessary. You can run the entire set of tasks, or you can single step them. It's called debug because that's kind of what the purpose of it is. You can step through them one at a time and see what happens. You can add a new task. You can clone the current task. You can delete a task. You can change the task order. You can either do that by moving a task up or down on the list, or you can change the order property over here, and it'll just renumber all the tasks accordingly. And finally, you can go and display some options. When you choose a particular task, it shows you over at the right the type of task it is. And once you've created a task and saved it, you can't change this task type anymore because the settings are specific for the task. If you need to change the type, you delete this one and create a new one. Anyway, you give it a name, whether it's active or not. Incomplete is used when you're sort of in the middle of building your task list and you're not finished testing this one. So you can mark it as incomplete and it won't be executed and neither for that matter would inactive ones. But incomplete ones also show up in a different highlight color. So that way you can see the orange ones are the ones that are incomplete. We'll talk about always run when single stepping in a little bit. Order is what order they appear in, and they're executed in the order they appear in. Comments or notes for yourself, such as, if it's incomplete, I haven't quite finished testing this URL yet, that kind of thing. Every task has a unique set of settings. So for example, for copy file, you're specifying the from and the to. In the case of rename file, it's the original name and the new name. In the case of delete file, it's just a certain name. In the case of write to registry, what hive are you writing to? What key, what setting you're writing to, what value are you writing, and what type is it? Is it a string, a 32-bit number, and so on? In the case of reading from the INI file, what INI file are you reading from? What setting? What item? And into what variable does those go? We'll talk about variables in a moment. Oh, sorry. And at the bottom here, it's right on the bottom, so you may not be able to see it, but it shows you the current path and name of the project file. A couple of color codes. So the orange ones are incomplete. The ones that are yellow are always run. And there's also a link to the DeployFox homepage here. All right. So let's talk about expressions and variables. If you have an application, and let's suppose that you have a file that's version specific, like the file name is version 2.0.txt, but then it's version 3.0.txt and 4.0.txt. You wouldn't want to hard code that name. And so DeployFox supports expressions. So you simply surround your expressions in these curly braces. I think Rick Strahl and other people call those mustache syntax. So we'll use mustache syntax for expressions. So you can see in the screenshot here that we've got some curly braces, and every setting can accept an expression instead of a hard-coded value. We also have support for variables. You'll use the set variable task to define a variable and optionally give it a value, but there are other task types that also can read from and write to variables. For example, the read from INI and read from registry both have you specify a variable name for what to read those things into. Variables are specified with a $sign. I kind of took the inspiration from this from PowerShell. PowerShell variables have the $sign prefix to indicate they're a variable as opposed to a keyword or something else. So if you're going to specify a variable, you would specify $sign and the variable name, and you would also put it in curly braces if you're using it as an expression. So you can see that the syntax over at the right there, where the server is specified as an expression coming from the FTP server variable. Now, you'll probably want to turn on always run when single stepping for the set variable statements or values or tasks that assign values to variables. Because if you're single stepping through and you choose, you start from step 5, but step 5 uses a variable that was defined in step 1. Well, if step 1 never got executed, the task can't complete because the variable wasn't defined, so it can't know what the value is. So by turning on always run when single stepping, and you start from step 5, it'll execute 1 through 4 if those are variable tasks first. Then it'll hit step 5, and now those variables exist, and so it'll be able to carry on. There are a number of built-in variables. We'll see a few examples of those as we go through the tasks, but they're also in the documentation as well. I got half an hour, half an hour, right? Yeah, okay. All right, so let's go and fire this guy up. Let's go and click on this task here, and let's start single stepping. Okay, so you'll notice, by the way, that it shows that 1 through 4 and 8, and we can't see it because this is covering it here, and 12 actually ran because they were defined as always run, and they were successful. There were no errors. So that's what that status column kind of indicates what's going on there. And let's see what this thing did. This thing copied. Project path is one of the built-in variables, so it's the same folder as your project. In this case, it's at the bottom there, DeployFox test project. That's the folder name. So it's going to copy from main.prg to b.prg. So let's go and take a look at that folder. And you can see that there's a main.prg, but there's a b.prg that didn't exist a minute ago because it copied the file. So now after a step has been done, you can either cancel, meaning, okay, I'm done. I ran that one step, I'm good. Or you can choose okay to go to the next step. So let's go and choose okay. And the next step was to copy B to C. So there's no longer a B, now there's a C. The next step is to delete C. And you can see there's no longer a C. And the next step is to read from an INI file. We're going to, or sorry, to write to an INI file. We're going to write to settings.ini, the settings section, the con string item, and we're going to write out the value of the con string variable. And con string variable was in step 8, which we didn't see. Anyway, if we go and take a look at this folder, there's now a settings.ini that didn't exist a minute ago, and it has a settings section with a con string item and the value of that, whatever that variable was. Next step is to read from an INI. So there's really nothing visual to show you here. It's reading from that same INI, the settings section, the con string item. It's reading it into the con string variable. Now you notice the variable is not specified with a $sign here because we're not using it. It knows that it's a variable. We're telling it to write it to a variable, and it's available from a drop-down list of the variables that you had previously defined. So we don't need the $sign. It just knows what that name is. Anyway, there's nothing to show you here. It just got read it to a variable. But the next step is to execute a script. So this is a kind of task we didn't see before. This is going to basically execute some VFP code that you put into this box here. And in this case, it's just issuing a message box. But you notice we have an expression. There are quotes around it because it's ultimately going to expand to a string. So mustache syntax, $, the variable. So as an expression with quotes around it, because it's a string, it's executing that now, and it's displaying the content of that con string variable. Okay, next task is to write to the Windows registry. And so we're going to write to HKey current user software testing, the test setting. It'll be the content of the test variable, and it's going to be a string that we're going to be writing out. And again, there's nothing to show you with this one. It's just done it. But now we're going to read from the Windows registry. So we're going to read from that same thing into the test variable. And now we're going to execute a script, which is, again, just to use a message box to display the value that got read in from the registry. So here it is. It read in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's what it read from the Windows registry. The next task is to build an executable. So from test.pjx, we're going to create test.exe. There's an option here to recompile all files. It's turned off. And if we take a look at this folder, there is now a test.exe. It's a very small project, so it didn't take long to build, but it built an exe for us. The next task is to run that. I'll show you the task in a second, but it actually ran our exe, and all it's doing is just displaying hello followed by some parameter. So here's the task. It's run executable, and it's going to run test.exe, and it's going to pass this set of parameters. In this case, it's only one parameter. And all of this exe does, its main program just says hello, whatever parameter got passed in. Some other settings for run executable tasks are whether you want to run it in hidden or not. So in this case, by the way, when you're debugging like we are now, it always shows the window. So even though I had said hidden, it actually did bring it up when it executed it. And that's because I'm single stepping. It's the debug mode. So the windows will always show. If you're running it as one set of tasks, then those windows don't pop up. Anyway, you can also choose whether it's supposed to wait until done. So if that was unchecked, then it would have displayed the exe, but then gone on to the next task, and that exe would still be there. Because I chose wait until done, it pauses waits until that executable is terminated, and then carries on to the next task. The next task, which kind of whipped by real quick here, and let's go to see what it was, that was to digitally sign an executable. And so it's going to sign test.exe and optionally have a description. So if we go and take a look at that test.exe now, and properties, can I get the properties? There we go. And you'll notice that there's a digital signatures tab, meaning that this file now has a digital signature. It was digitally signed. Next task, we'll go by pretty quickly, and it did show that window because we're in debug mode, but the task was to upload a file. So we're going to upload to ftp.stonefieldquery.com. The username and password I didn't want to display here for obvious reasons. So I defined them as variables, and I didn't show you the tasks where those, but actually the variables were actually read from an INI file, and I'm not showing you the INI file. So anyway, so the username and password to connect to that server, and we're uploading main.prg to a file called yada.prg. And if we go and connect using FileZilla to that FTP site, there's yada.prg that just got uploaded. Which, if you think about it, that's probably how you're going to be uploading your executable, right, to your site. Your customers can download it. That's obviously a more typical task than uploading a PRG. All right, and the next one, which again went by quickly, is, oops, sorry, not that window. This window was to download a file. So same FTP site, same credentials. We're going to download yada.prg into x.prg. And if we go in that folder, there's now an x.prg that ultimately contains the content of main, because we uploaded main to yada, we downloaded yada to x.prg. Next one is to run a PRG. So here you specify the name of the PRG you want to run and what parameters you want to pass. And there was a reminder at the bottom that even if you're using an expression, if they're string parameters, you have to put quotes around them, because ultimately that expression is going to get evaluated and output as a string. So we have to put quotes around it. And so all it's doing is it's saying hello in this path. And that's because the parameter I'm passing is another one of those built-in variables, app path, which is the path where DeployFox is located, and that's where I've got DeployFox installed. Write to a file. So here we're going to write to test.txt these lines. So if we go and take a look at the folder now, we now have a text.txt that has those 2 lines. I actually use this task for updating version numbers. For example, a new version of my application. So I'm going to go and write to a text file, version 5.3, so that I can, do something with that somewhere. But I actually, well, we'll see another example of that in a bit. And next, those of you who use Inno Setup will probably recognize this window. But again, this window won't show up if you're not running in debug mode. But what that task was to use Inno Setup to build an exe. In this case, it's the test.iss is the Inno Setup file. I didn't specify a log file, so it didn't write to a log. But if I had specified this, it would have written to a log file. And you can now see that there is an output folder, and in that folder is a setup.exe, because that's what that ISS file did, was to create that folder, no, that ISS.
That automatically wait for the build to complete.
Yes, it waits for the build to complete. Yes, before going on, because you may have some tasks like uploading the file. I just built my setup executable. Now I need to upload it to an FTP server. We have to wait until it's finished being built. So yeah, it waits until it's done. All right, the next task is to zip some files. So we're going to create test.zip. We're going to zip up the PJX and the PJT files. And if we take a look in that folder, there's now a test.zip. And if we take a look at what is inside of it, it's the test.pjx and the test.pjt. The next task is to unzip a file. So we're going to unzip test.zip into test folder. And if we take a look, we now have a test folder, and it contains those 2 files. And finally, we're going to delete that folder. And because it uses that same VFPX file operation. This, this is all built for, again, we're having the common functionality, right? So now we're using the VFPX framework here. So it, again, used that to delete that test folder, and now it's gone. And that's it. Those are all the tasks. And so now it says run complete. Would you like to view the log file? Why, yes, I would. Please show me what you did. And here's all the list of all the tasks that it did, whether they succeeded or not, what their parameters were. So here we can see main.prg was uploaded to yada.prg at this particular FTP site using, there's the username and password in clear text. That's okay. This is a site that we kind of uses for customers. So
we'll send you some presents.
Yeah, yeah. Here's where it generated the. It ran the used ISS to generate the exe and so on. So this log file shows you everything that it did, whether it succeeded or not, and so on. And you can see by the status flag here that everything did in fact succeed. Okay. Oops. Yes. Sorry.
So when Inno Setup is run, it generally has some information regarding other dependencies that have to be included in the setup program.
Yeah. So in your there's a yes. So will Inno Setup know about dependencies? It's actually up to you to do that. So in your ISS file, this is my Inno Setup ISS file. We'll just open it with Notepad.
See, I was imagining that you might be constructing.
Yeah, no, you could. I actually do in with Stonefield Query. We actually do generate on the fly an ISS file and then compile it. But this one, that's a very untypical use of ISS. So here's the script file for this particular setup. Yeah. Any other? I still have what, 15 minutes or so? Yes. Okay, so I'm actually kind of done. So let's go and take a look now, maybe at some of the tasks. Let's take a look at how DeployFox actually works. Or yeah, it's sort of the internals of it, not that window. I'm going to go to DeployFox. So all of the tasks are just subclasses of, go to the top here. So there's a task-based class. We won't bother looking at that, but it's got methods to read settings as XML, save the settings as XML, and they're going to all be written to that table. Get an XML parser. It has an abstract method called execute, and it has a log method, and so on. And then from that, there's going to be subclasses. So we have a registry-based task. This is used for reading from and writing to registries. We'll have subclasses of it for each, but this is going to be a base task for registry operations. And then we have a subclass of it that's specific for writing to the registry. And you notice we're using the VFPX framework. It has a VFPX registry class that's used for reading from and writing to the registry. So it uses that to write, and it writes to this task, just has one, and most of the tasks just have one method. They just implement execute that does whatever that task is supposed to do. But they also have properties that define what their settings are. And I'll show you where those are used in a moment. Read from registry, write to INI, read from INI. So in the case of reading from an INI, it has to know what the name of the INI file is, what section to read from, what item, and what variable to store the results in. And so it's going to use this read INI, which is part of the VFPX framework, to read from those things, and then it's just going to write it to the variable. Here it's saying LO variable.value equals whatever it read from the INI file. Unzipping, that uses the VFPX framework, unzip the VFPX unzip.prg to unzip a file. So it really just has a couple properties what's the name of the zip file, and what is the target where we're going to write the zip files to. And zip files, and rename file, and delete file, and copy file, and the folder, and create folder. So just a whole lot of tasks running an exe, signing an executable, building an Inno Setup executable, running a PRG, executing a script. In other words, VFP script right there. Building an exe, uploading a file, downloading a file, setting a variable. Some of these have additional methods, though. In the case of this one, there's a we're overriding the get settings method, because when it reads the value of a variable, to display it as a task, when we display the task, we don't want it expanded. We want to know that the variable is FTP user. So we want to know that the name of the variable is FTP user. But when we use it in another task, we do want to expand its value. So now we see it as, whatever that password was, for example, or something like that. And so get settings gets a parameter, whether we're supposed to expand the variable or not. And if it's passed as true, then we will not expand it. We'll just return the name. Otherwise, we'll return the expanded value. Evaluated value, that's what I was trying to say. Writing to a file, executing PostScript. So you can actually execute a PostScript script from within DeployFox as well. So those are, like I said, all the different tasks. The UI, there's a task UI base that just defines a container with nothing in it, but it has some methods. And then all of the settings are just subclasses of that. And they're named for whatever the task is, with UI as the suffix. So for example, to build an exe, it's the build exe UI class as the thing that displays the settings. So it just says what the two settings I need. I need the project, the three settings. I need the project to build, the exe to create, and whether compiling all files. And these just have their properties set to the properties of that task object, right? So if we take a look at build exe, build exe has three properties. Oh, sorry, that's build setup. Sorry, next one. Here we go, build exe. It has three properties: the name of the project to build, C source, C target is the exe to create, and L compile is whether to compile or not. So in the UI, those controls, the text box and the checkbox, are simply bound to the C source, C target, and L recompile properties of the task object that is currently in use. And it happens to be an instance of the build exe object. So when you click on a task, it instantiates, it knows that it's a build exe task because that's what's in the table. It instantiates a build exe instance. It gets its settings from the table, so it fills in those properties, and the UI is bound to those properties. And when you click save, it writes those properties back out again. So it's all, like I said, it's all pretty straightforward. And each of the different tasks just do something different in their execute method. In this case, it's going to be, build an exe, optionally recompiling or not, and then returning true if it did build the exe, and also doing some logging. That way we can see the log file at the end of the run. We can see what it actually did. All right. So, any questions about DeployFox? Yes, Joel. So the question was, if you're running your own program and it returns false, then it'll cancel the rest of the run. And the answer is yes. So if any of the tasks fail, then the run stops. Oh, sorry, I did mean to show you one other thing. I wanted to show you, let's close this guy. I wanted to show you the new set of tasks for Stonefield Query deployment. So let's go back to DeployFox, and we'll open up the Stonefield Query SDK project. And now, instead of, a bazillion lines in my manual checklist, now there's 67 lines in my automated checklist, and my manual checklist looks like this now. That's it. There's a few manual things that have to be done, like updating the release history. I go through our our repository and all the changes that were done, you know, for the last how many months, and I just type it in English because it all has, you know, I changed this particular thing because we were getting a bug in whatever, and translated into English that the user will read means we fixed something. So I manually update the release history, the 2 release history files. I'll manually update this files.xml with, again, a brief description of what changed. I'll manually update the what's new topic in the help files. I will manually change the version number in one place. And then everything else is all, you know, then the next thing is run DeployFox and let it do its 67 items. And then we just update our blog and, you know, saying that there's a new version and create a branch and which could have been automated as well, by the way. So like I said, the list of tasks is, the list of manual tasks is now way shorter, but there's 67 automated tasks, including things like we have a customer portal, and the portal lists all the different versions of Stonefield Query that are available. And so you can download an earlier version if you need to. So that's actually stored in a JS file. We need to update that JS file. What was formerly the current version, that gets renamed to the, you know, setup 7.1.4201.exe, and we have to add a new line showing the deployment date and the new version. So this is all that we download from our server. We download, oops, there's my password. We download config.js. We update it with a script. So this script just goes and finds the last entry in this file, changes the text of it, adds a new line to the file for the new entry, and then we upload it, which I won't be dumb enough to click on this time. And there's things like, you know, run this batch file to convert binary, you know, basically running FoxGet to PRG to convert, you know, to do generate those text files, you know, building the setup, there's a couple setups, uploading the setup to the server and up to 2 different places in our current folder and update folder, uploading the files.xml to the update folder, updating the online help, runs a PowerShell script to upload all of our help files to folders that the help is available online. Yes, Patrick. Which task was that? Probably this one here. Oh, so the reason I'm doing this, I think I have a comment here and then there that actually says why. If you click on the script button, it just expands it. And where did it go? It's probably in behind somewhere. There. Oops, sorry. Try that again. Because I had this thing sized such that it's readable, it's also hard for me to find the things I need here. Okay, so there's a comment in here that I'm using, and I don't think I can show you both at the same, not easily show you both at the same time, but there's a comment in here that says I have to use char 123 instead of a curly brace, because this was a thing I found the hard way, because a curly brace is the you know, that mustache syntax for evaluating expression. So when it was executing this code, it was saying, oh, I see some expressions you want me to evaluate. I'll evaluate them for them. And it messed up what should have really been inside curly braces. And I couldn't figure out why the script was blowing up until it occurred to me, oh yeah, it's evaluating what's inside the curly braces when I don't want it to. So that's why I put in CHR 123 plus the text that I wanted plus CHR 124. So now I get the curly braces, but without DeployFox knowing that they're curly braces. So that's where that came from. Okay. Yes, Robert. Yes. Right. So the question was, for digital signing, how does that work, basically? And so the way it works is you need a digital certificate, and obviously I'm not supplying one. So you have to apply for a digital certificate and then install it on your machine. And then we use the Microsoft sign tool.exe to digitally sign that exe. That's the good news. I see a couple hands going up, but I know where you're going with this. That's the good news, and it works for me today because my certificate doesn't renew until March of 2025. When I renew my certificate, I'm going to have to rewrite I'm going to have to probably have a second different sign.exe because the way sign.exes work changes. It has already changed for some people. Because I don't have that new certificate. I don't know how it works, and so that's why I haven't written it yet. So if somebody else does and they want to send me some code, that'd be great. If not, okay, I see a couple hands going up, a couple volunteers, great, and I'll just implement it. But barring that, until I actually get my new digital certificate, I don't really know what I need to do. So sometime next March or earlier, there'll be an updated version of DeployFox that will use the new certificate mechanism. So, yes, Kevin. Renew early. If I were to renew now, that would help you out. Okay. Okay. Yes, Rick. Oh, really? Not at all? Ah. Okay. And there are ways to do pauses. In fact, I have to do that with this script. I think it's way back up here. Somewhere up here is here, I think. 28. Oh yeah, pause. So the reason I'm pausing here is because this is my new Dell, and it has like a 4K screen. And when I generate screenshots, so in Stonefield Query, we generate screenshots. We actually run the application like as an automated mechanism and take screenshots of every screen because the developer can customize how the appearance of the program. So we take screenshots of all those screens, and then we build the help file. Well, the problem is that those screenshots we're using just the Windows API, and I haven't quite figured out yet why, but the screenshots don't generate properly on my 4K monitor. They've got weird backgrounds and other kind of stuff around them. So I still have my old Dell. So all I simply do is I install the new version of Stonefield Query on the old Dell, run it to generate all the screenshots. And so that's what it does here. It copies my Stonefield Query to my old Dell, and then it pauses for screenshot generation. So it just basically sits and waits until I tell it otherwise. And then it copies the files from the old Dell to the new Dell. It copies the images, everything that was done. That's all automated. All I have to do is just pause. And when I can see over here it's done, then I click on OK, and it just carries on. So that's kind of like a semi-manual task that I have to do. So, all right. Any other questions? All right. Well, we're done a couple minutes early, so let's go back to the slides here. All right. To summarize, VFPX Framework can be used as a starting point for new VFPX projects without having to recreate base libraries, recreate functionality, and so on. But you can also use these things in your own applications. If you have the need to download or upload files or zip, or you want persistence or read from write to INI files, and you don't already have libraries to do that for you, feel free to use whatever is in VFPX Framework. FoxGet is the VFP equivalent of NuGet. It allows you to quickly install some library from out in the world somewhere and add that functionality to your application. And finally, DeployFox allows you to automate deployment. By the way, if you think about it, it's just a list of tasks, so it isn't necessarily about deployment. You can have it automate anything that you might manually do on your computer. If it's copying files from here to there, uploading a bunch of files, nothing to do with deployment, you can just automate those tasks as long as they're, as long as there's a task for it. All right. One question at the back. Oh, no. Oh, good question. I'll repeat the question. Are you evaluating the session or? All right. Thank you very much.